The unfinished moment the rain had started softly that morning, just a light drizzle that covered the old Hollywood backlot like a thin veil. Puddles formed near the edge of the set where crew members once walked, their laughter long gone, their footsteps replaced by silence. Keanu Reeves stood there alone, a dark umbrella in his hand, the same umbrella from a scene that was never finished. It was supposed to be a simple love scene, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just two people meeting in the rain, saying what they could never say when the sun was shining. But the film shut down suddenly, the studio went bankrupt, and the scene remained a memory buried under half-written scripts and forgotten dreams. Yet Keanu had returned years later to that exact spot. The rain fell harder now, washing the dust off the empty camera tracks. His coat was soaked, but he did not move. His eyes were fixed on the corner of the street set where she used to stand. Sandra Bullock. Her laughter still echoed faintly in his memory, like a song you can't stop humming even when it hurts. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "We never finished this." For a long time, the only sound was the rain. A security guard walked by, confused by the sight of a man standing alone in a place that was supposed to be closed. But when he recognized Keanu, he froze. The actor smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, I'm just visiting an old scene." The guard nodded awkwardly and left. Keanu turned his eyes back to the faded set, where wooden doors peeled and painted signs hung crooked. He could almost see Sandra again, standing in that blue coat, her hair sticking to her cheeks as she smiled through the cold. He remembered her last words before the cameras stopped rolling. "One day we'll finish this," she had said with quiet confidence. That was 20 years ago. The years between had not been kind or cruel. They had simply moved on like trains that never look back once they leave the station. Keanu had gone through his share of heartbreaks and silent days. He had seen the world celebrate him and forget him, sometimes in the same week. But through it all, he never let go of the memory of that unfinished moment. There was something about that scene, the purity of it, the raw emotion that never reached the screen. Maybe that was why he came back now, not for nostalgia but for closure. He slowly placed the umbrella on the ground and sat on one of the old wooden benches, rain soaking his hair. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a folded photograph, a behind-the-scenes picture of him and Sandra smiling at each other while crew members adjusted lights around them. Their eyes met even through the frozen frame. He looked at it for a long time, then closed his eyes. A voice broke the silence. "You always sit in the rain when you're thinking, don't you?" He turned sharply. For a second, his breath caught. There she was, Sandra Bullock, standing under a small black umbrella, her expression half amused, half tender. Her presence felt unreal, as if the memory itself had taken human form. "You're late," he said quietly, a faint smile appearing on his lips. "Some scenes take time," she replied, walking closer until she stood beside him. "I heard you came here. Thought you might need company." He looked down at the wet pavement. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," she admitted, her voice soft. "But when I heard they were demolishing this lot next week, I thought maybe it's time." He looked up again, meeting her eyes through the rain. "Time to finish the scene," she smiled gently. "Or at least say goodbye to it." They stood there, two actors whose lives had crossed too many times to be called coincidence. The rain eased slightly, as if giving them a moment of peace. Keanu's gaze softened. "Do you remember your line?" She nodded. "Of course, I've been carrying it for years." "Say it," he whispered. She looked up at him, rain dripping from her lashes, and said the same words she had all those years ago. "If we meet again in the rain, promise me we won't walk away this time." His throat tightened. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of everything they never said. Regret, longing, friendship, respect. It was all there. Finally he said, "Then let's not walk away." They both smiled faintly. She took his hand, their fingers cold but steady. No cameras, no lights, no director calling action. Just two people completing what time had once interrupted. The rain fell around them, washing away old memories, blending tears with water until they became the same. As they walked off the set together, Keanu turned one last time. "You know, I waited here once before, years ago." "In the rain?" she asked. He nodded. "For the scene we never finished." She looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe it was never meant to end on screen. Maybe it was meant to end like this." For the first time in a long while, he smiled, not the polite smile he gave at interviews, but a real one. The kind that comes from finding peace after years of waiting. They walked toward the exit, leaving behind the broken props and forgotten dreams. In the distance, thunder rolled softly like applause from the sky. Keanu didn't look back again. Some stories, he realized, don't need an ending. They just need a moment of truth. As they reached the car, Sandra paused. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we finished that movie?" He thought for a second. "I think we did. Just not the way they planned." She smiled, opening her umbrella again. "You always were the quiet philosopher," he laughed gently, "and you were always the one who made me believe in timing." The rain slowed to a drizzle, the sky clearing just enough to reveal a soft patch of light. It was not sunlight exactly, but something gentler, like a promise that life moves forward even when the scene cuts early. They drove off together, leaving the lot behind. Somewhere between the echoes of the past and the silence of the present, they both knew that what was unfinished no longer haunted them. Because sometimes, closure doesn't come from finishing the story. It comes from finally letting it rain. The rain ended during their drive, and the city turned quiet as the wipers settled. The road glowed with soft reflections, and small drops clung to the side mirrors like tiny memories. Sandra watched the lines of light slide along the glass, and her voice was gentle. "We left something behind in there." Keanu kept his eyes on the road and breathed slowly. "We carried it out with us," he said, but he knew the weight still lived in his chest. They stopped at a narrow diner that stayed open late. The sign buzzed with a steady hum, and the windows fogged from the steam rising off the coffee machines. The server recognized them, but he did not stare. He poured coffee for both of them, and he spoke with respect. "I loved that film you almost finished," he said with a small smile, then he corrected himself. "I mean the one you were going to finish." He moved away politely, and the two friends looked at each other, grateful for the kindness. Sandra warmed her hands on the cup. She looked tired, but something steady lit her gaze. "Do you remember the old script pages?" she asked. "The ones the script supervisor kept marked with blue pencil." Keanu nodded. "Maria," he said. She guarded every line like a promise. Sandra leaned closer. "Maria called me last week," she said. "She found something in a storage unit, not props, not wardrobe, not receipts. She found a can with a label that said Rain Scene, Take 0. Keanu felt his heart close and open in the same moment. Take 0 sounded like a private joke or a mistake that was not a mistake. He asked if Maria still had it. Sandra nodded again. "She wants to see us tomorrow morning. She said it belongs to us as much as to anyone. She said unfinished moments do not like to be alone." Morning arrived with clear light, and the city shook off the storm. They met Maria in a small warehouse near the old river road. She was older now, with silver hair and bright eyes that missed nothing. She hugged them like family, and her hands were warm. "I kept this because it felt alive," she said, and she lifted a metal can from a padded box lined with soft cloth. The label was handwritten, and the words were simple. Rain Scene. Rehearsal, no sound. Date was written in small letters, and the year felt far away and close at the same time. Keanu held the can with care and did not speak for a while. Sandra watched his hands, and she remembered how those hands held every prop with respect. Maria led them to an old projector that she had cleaned the night before. "I called a friend who restores film," she said. "He checked the strip and said it would not break if we kept the speed slow and the room cool." She smiled with pride at her careful work. "I thought you would want to see it first," she said quietly. They dimmed the lights. The projector clicked with a steady rhythm. Grainy pictures bloomed on the white wall like a memory stepping forward from the shadows. There they were, young and unguarded, standing in the rain with soft smiles that were not for the camera. The take began before the slate, and a crew member laughed from outside the frame. The rain machine started late, and the first drops fell in a crooked pattern that looked like shy handwriting. They watched themselves breathe, and for a moment the room felt like a chapel. No sound played, but they could hear the past anyway. Keanu leaned forward, eyes fixed on a small detail. His younger self kept glancing left toward a crooked street lamp that swayed in the wind. Sandra leaned forward too. "He was not looking at a mark," she said. "He was watching me fight the cold." She laughed softly. I kept pretending I was not shaking. On the screen, the two of them stepped closer, not yet acting, just existing. Raindrops became a thin silver curtain. Keanu lifted his hands as if to speak, then dropped them and smiled with a kind of quiet awe. The film ran for less than a minute. There was no slate, no action, no cut. It faded as if a breath had grown tired. The room stayed silent after the projector clicked to a stop. Maria cleared her throat gently. "There is more," she said. The can had a folded note inside. She handed it to Sandra. The paper was thin and old, but still strong. Sandra read it aloud, and her voice remained steady. "Keep this safe in case they forget the rain." It was signed with initials they all knew. It belonged to the director who had fought for quiet instead of noise. The note did not ask for fame or blame. It asked for memory. Keanu looked at Maria with gratitude. "Thank you for keeping this," he said. Maria shook her head. "I was only the bridge," she said, and her voice warmed. "You two carried the river." Sandra turned to Keanu. "We could do a small screening," she said. "Not a press event, not a public game, just a room with people who cared." Then she hesitated. "I have a different idea if you are open to risk." He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Say it," he said. She took a breath and spoke with calm boldness. "We do the scene now, not for money, not for a studio, but for closure. The lot is still there for a few days. The people who work there are human. If we ask with respect, they might allow it. We bring a small team, we keep it simple, we tell the truth. We finish it under the same sky." Maria nodded slowly. "The old road still leads to the same door," she said. "If you walk it with care, the door may open." Keanu felt the idea land in his chest like a steady drum. He did not need a budget or a contract or a campaign. He needed honesty and a little rain. That afternoon, they called people who knew how to work quietly and well. A young cinematographer answered with a bright voice and a steady plan. She had learned from crews who learned from crews who had learned from Maria. A sound recordist offered to bring light gear that would not disturb the old buildings. A small team formed, not out of noise but out of trust. Every person answered with the same tone. "Tell the story right. Do not rush, be kind." They returned to the lot with permission from a tired manager who remembered the director with respect. He said they could use the street set for a few hours before a demolition crew began placing markers. His voice held a warning that was not unkind. "Be careful. The wood is old. The rails will bite if you forget them." They thanked him and stepped through the gate that had held so many dreams. The street looked different under clean daylight. Paint peeled a little more, and the brick faces seemed to lean with age. Sandra walked to the spot where she had stood in the blue coat, and she lifted her face to the open sky. "We do not have the rain machine," she said. The cinematographer smiled. "Sometimes water finds the actors anyway." A gray cloud drifted slowly from the west, and the air cooled with the promise of a light shower. Destiny did not shout. It cleared its throat and waited. They rehearsed the shape of the scene with quiet voices. The lines did not fight them. The lines behaved like friends who had remained nearby for years. Keanu felt a tremor in his hands, and he welcomed it. He did not want a perfect performance built from steel. He wanted a human moment that could bend and breathe. Sandra looked at him with the same steadiness from the old rehearsal footage, and her eyes said something deeper than any line. "We are ready." The first drops fell like a polite knock. The sound recordist lifted his hand to test the pattern of falling water. The cinematographer checked focus, then spoke softly. "Whenever you are ready." Maria watched from the edge with her palms pressed together. The lot felt like a heart that had been hurt and was brave enough to beat again. They stepped into the rain as if stepping back into a promise. Sandra began with a breath that tasted like a memory of winter and sugar tea. Keanu moved in small, honest motions, each one earned by years of patience. The line she carried for years was ready, but she waited for the right breath. That breath came. "If we meet again in the rain, promise me we will not walk away this time." The words did not tremble. They settled. Keanu felt the answer rise from a place that had learned to grieve and forgive. He spoke with quiet strength. "Then we will not walk away." His hand found hers, and the rain gathered around them like a crowd that knew when to speak and when to listen. It was not a performance pretending to be real. It was real that wore the shape of a performance. The silent crew did not cheer. They breathed out together as if they had been holding the air for 20 years. The cinematographer lowered the camera with care, and her voice remained soft. "We have it." The sound recordist nodded. "I heard more than words," he said. "I heard a door close and another door open." They did one more take to honor the ritual of cinema, then they stopped. The rain eased, as if it understood that its part was complete for now. Keanu and Sandra stood in the middle of the street with water on their faces and a light in their eyes that looked like peace. Maria walked up with a towel, but she did not rush. She placed the towel on their shoulders as if crowning them with kindness. They returned the set to the exact way they found it. They thanked the manager and the staff, and they tipped the security team with quiet generosity that did not seek attention. The young cinematographer backed up the footage 3 times in 3 safe places, and she labeled each card with clear handwriting. No fancy names, only the truth. Rain scene, final. In the late afternoon, they gathered in a small screening room that a friend offered for an hour. The room smelled like old wood and fresh paint. They projected the new footage side by side with the old rehearsal. The contrast was not a competition. It was a conversation across time. The younger faces held hope, the older faces held wisdom, and both carried the same respect for craft and for each other. Near the middle of the screening, something curious happened. The old rehearsal showed a brief shape behind the rain, a shape that none of them had noticed before. Maria paused the frame. At the edge of the street near the crooked lamp, a child stood barely inside the border of the shot. He held a small notebook and watched with open wonder. Maria leaned closer and her eyes softened. That was the intern, she said. He was the son of the costume mistress. He followed the rain like it was a storybook. Sandra stared at the small figure and felt a pattern forming. I met a young director last month, she said slowly. He told me his mother worked in wardrobe years ago, and he said he grew up on sets like playgrounds. He carried a small notebook everywhere. Keanu lifted his chin with interest. What was his name, he asked. Sandra said the name carefully. Lucas. Maria nodded. That was him. He loved the way a scene holds a secret until it trusts you. Keanu sat back and considered the thread that time was stitching for them. Sandra checked her phone and found a message from the same young director. It had arrived earlier that day, but she had missed it in the rush. The message was short and meaningful. I found a letter in my mother's box, he wrote. It mentions a rain scene that never ended. It says to return the last page to the people who earned it. Can we meet tomorrow? Sandra turned her phone for Keanu and Maria to see. Hope warmed the room again, and the air seemed to brighten. The next morning, they met Lucas at a small community theater that he was helping restore. The place smelled of sawdust and bright plans. Lucas shook their hands with quiet joy, not as fans, but as a fellow worker in the House of Stories. He opened a thin envelope with care and revealed a single page, typed in clean letters. It was the final page of the rain scene, a page that had gone missing when the production closed. The last lines were simple and brave. They agreed to leave the street, not because the rain had ended, but because life waited in a different light. Then a direction followed that none of them had seen before. The camera does not follow them. The camera stays with the empty street. The rain keeps falling. The memory learns how to be still. Keanu read the page twice without speaking. Sandra felt emotion rise and settle, and she did not fight it. Maria smiled as if a child had returned a lost toy that still worked. Lucas looked at them with bright respect. My mother said this belonged to the people who believed in quiet, he said. She told me to return it the day I was ready to direct something with more listening than shouting. They invited Lucas to join their tiny team for a final pickup, a closing shot that matched the newly found stage direction. The lot allowed them one more hour before the demolition crew returned. They set the camera at the end of the street, framed the shot so the empty bricks and the gentle lamplight held the center, and waited for the sky to choose. The sky did not rush. Clouds balanced themselves, and a fine rain began to fall like careful handwriting again. The camera rolled, and no one moved. The shot stayed still for a long count, and it felt like prayer, and no one needed to speak. When the card reached the planned length, Lucas whispered a soft end. The rain continued as the camera stopped, as if the weather had more to say to the street than to the people. They covered the gear and thanked the space. Keanu turned to the old facades and bowed with a modest tilt of the head. Sandra placed her hand on the warm brick and smiled. Maria blew a small kiss to the crooked lamp. The crew packed in quiet joy. Their small screening that night was for the workers who kept the lot safe, for the families who had carried stories home, for the friend who restored film, for the manager who trusted their hearts. They did not sell tickets. They made tea, they passed cookies, and they left a jar that read support the night shift. By the end, the jar was full of small bills and folded notes. The notes said thank you and keep going, and we remember. The notes were worth more than the money. The film unspooled on the white wall with calm confidence. The rehearsal opened first, then the new scene flowed in with its strong quiet. The final shot held the empty street, and the rain wrote soft lines across the stone. No music played. The room breathed together. When the light faded, no one clapped at first. They sat with the silence, then applause rose like a tide that did not drown anything. It lifted instead. The night shift crew wiped their eyes and laughed at themselves, and the manager shook Keanu's hand with both of his. Sandra hugged Maria, and Lucas stood off to the side with his notebook, writing one sentence. Sometimes the best ending is a doorway that stays open. After the screening, an older producer approached with a familiar face and a measured tone. He had tried to buy the footage years ago for reasons that sounded kind but were not. He cleared his throat and offered a deal on the spot. His words were smooth. His smile asked for something he could own. Keanu listened politely and then spoke with firm kindness. This was never about owning, he said. This was about honoring. We will share it in a way that keeps its heart safe. The producer left with a nod that hid a small sting. Maria looked at Keanu with approval. Sandra squeezed his hand. Lucas watched and learned that saying no can be a form of care. Over the next days, they prepared a plan that matched their values. The plan was not a commercial launch. It was a series of community nights for film students, stage crews, and night workers who keep cities kind. There would be no posters with loud claims. There would be a simple message with a simple invitation. Come sit with a quiet moment. Bring your own story of something you finished late and finished right. The night before the first community screening, Sandra received a small package with no return address. Inside, she found a key with a paper tag. The tag had a handwriting she recognized. It belonged to the director who had left the note inside the can. The tag said train station locker, platform 7, after sundown. She showed it to Keanu with wide eyes and a small smile. He read the card and felt the next chapter arrive like a careful knock. Maria looked from one face to the other, and her smile grew like sunrise. A secret waits where journeys begin, she said. They agreed to go together. Not as stars, not as legends, but as friends who were brave enough to listen. They wore plain coats and soft shoes and hats that hid their faces just enough to pass without causing trouble. The station bustled with evening life, and the smell of coffee twisted through the cool air. They found the row of lockers near the old mural of a river, and the key turned with a clean click that sounded like a promise kept. Inside the locker sat another can and a small envelope. The envelope held a single photograph. It showed the empty street after rain, taken from the exact framing of their final shot. In the corner of the picture, a reflection shaped like a heart had formed in a shallow puddle. The back of the photograph held a sentence that felt like a blessing from beyond time. Thank you for finishing the rain by learning when to stop walking. Keanu held the photo against his chest for a second, then passed it to Sandra and Maria. The can felt lighter than the first, and a handwritten label carried an unexpected title. Rain Scene, Goodbye Take. Lucas joined them near the benches with his notebook, and his eyes shone. The group looked at each other and understood that art and life had agreed to share something rare. Not fame, not profit, a trust. They walked back into the night with steady steps and quiet hearts. The city lights shone on wet pavement, and each reflection looked like a small doorway. Keanu lifted his face to the cool air and felt a simple truth land gently. Every scene ends when the people inside it can walk toward daylight without fear. Their plan would continue, but it would continue slowly and with care. There would be screenings in small halls with soft chairs. There would be conversations with students who wanted to learn the craft of listening. There would be late-night talks with custodians who knew more about silence than any script. There would be respect for the lot, and the people who kept it standing long enough for a promise to be fulfilled. And there would be the next mystery of the goodbye take, waiting patiently inside its light metal circle. Not to be rushed, not to be hoarded. To be opened when the right room of people was ready to hear rain play without music. Keanu and Sandra stood near the edge of a quiet street and shared a simple hug of gratitude. Maria watched them with the peaceful joy of a gardener who sees a tree finally bear fruit. Lucas wrote one last sentence before the page ended. The rain taught them how to finish with kindness, and the city learned how to listen. The next morning began with soft sunlight and quiet air that felt new. The storm had passed, yet something remained between the clouds. Not sadness, but memory. Keanu woke early, made tea, and sat by the window of his small house near the hills. The world outside looked peaceful, and for the first time in years, he felt that peace reach him too. On the table beside him lay the photograph from the train station, the one with the heart-shaped reflection in the puddle. He kept looking at it like a message that still spoke. The note written on the back stayed clear in his mind. Thank you for finishing the rain by learning when to stop walking. He turned the photo once more and whispered, almost as if speaking to the old director. We did what you asked. There was a knock at the door. Sandra stood outside, her hair tied back and her smile calm but full of purpose. You're awake early, she said softly. Couldn't sleep much, he replied. Too many thoughts, but good ones this time. She stepped inside and handed him a folded newspaper. On the front page was a small article with a picture from the community screening. The headline read, Two actors returned to finish a story they began 20 years ago. Not for fame, but for peace. Keanu smiled. They make it sound so poetic. Sandra poured herself some tea and sat across from him. It was poetic, she said. Maybe not the way the world measures it, but in its own quiet way. He nodded, then asked, "How's Maria?" "She's already planning to restore another old lot," Sandra replied with a small laugh. "She says stories deserve clean homes." They both laughed softly. It felt good to laugh without heaviness. After a few moments, Sandra grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about the can we found in the locker," she said. "Rain scene, goodbye take. What if it's something he made before he died? Something he wanted us to see?" Keanu's eyes softened. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Or maybe it's something he wanted us to finish." They decided to open it together that evening, at the same small theater where they had watched the other films. Lucas and Maria agreed to join. The thought of another unknown piece from their past felt both exciting and fragile. As the sun fell, the four of them gathered in the old theater again. The light inside was warm, and the projector hummed gently like a heartbeat. Keanu placed the can on the table. Everyone grew quiet as he lifted the lid. Inside, instead of film, they found a small reel of tape and a folded letter tied with a faded blue ribbon. Sandra carefully opened the letter and read aloud. The words were written in the same calm, thoughtful style as before. "If you are reading this, it means you listened to the rain. The scene was never about love between characters. It was about what love teaches us. Patience, timing, kindness, and the courage to stand still when everything moves too fast. If you ever finish this story, do it not for applause, but for understanding. Leave one last frame unspoken. That's where the truth lives." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. Maria reached out and touched her arm. "He always believed the best scenes breathe between words," she said. Keanu nodded. "And he left this for us to breathe with him one more time." Lucas gently set the tape in an old player he had brought. When the tape began to roll, a quiet sound filled the room. Rain again, soft and steady, with faint voices behind it. It was not dialogue, not music, just moments. A hand clapping a slate, a crew member humming, the laughter of the director, then silence. Then came his voice. Older, slower, filled with peace. "If you are hearing this, then the rain has done its work. Remember that stories do not belong to those who make them. They belong to those who carry them forward." For a long time, no one moved. Sandra blinked away tears and smiled. "He knew we'd come back," she whispered. Keanu closed his eyes. "He trusted we would finish it the right way," Maria exhaled slowly. And we did. The room fell into silence again, the kind that felt like gratitude. Over the next few weeks, word spread quietly through creative circles about what they had done. Small film schools and art collectives began inviting them to share their experience, not as stars, but as storytellers. Keanu was hesitant at first. He had never liked being the center of attention, but Sandra convinced him. "This isn't about us," she said. "It's about teaching others that unfinished things can still be beautiful." They began traveling together, not with press or security, but with Maria and Lucas, carrying a single suitcase that held the film reels and the photograph from the puddle. Each stop had its own story. In one small-town theater, the projector broke halfway through. Instead of panicking, they lit candles and spoke directly to the audience about patience. In another city, a young filmmaker stood up and said, "I was about to quit my project because it felt incomplete. Now I think I'll let it rain a little longer." Keanu smiled at that. He turned to Sandra and whispered, "Maybe that's our real scene?" She nodded. "The one that keeps repeating in other people." One evening, after their last talk of the tour, Lucas approached them with excitement. "I've been working on something," he said. "A short film inspired by everything we've done. I call it After the Rain. I want you both to see it before anyone else." They met again the next morning in his small editing studio. The film began with the sound of rain and the image of two empty chairs facing each other in an open field. Over time, the chairs filled with people, not actors, but ordinary people from around the world, sitting in silence, listening to the rain. At the end, one of them stood up and left behind a small note that read, Peace is not found when the scene ends. It is found when the heart stops waiting. By the time it finished, Sandra's eyes were wet. "You've learned from him," she said softly to Lucas. Lucas smiled. "I learned from all of you." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Keep it simple," he said. "Keep it kind. That's all a story really needs." A few months later, the city announced that the old lot, the one where it all began, would be replaced with a new arts academy. Maria was invited to consult on the design, and she made a request that surprised everyone. "Keep the old street," she said. "Don't rebuild over it. Let it stay cracked and real. Make it a place where students can walk and remember what silence feels like." The city agreed. On the opening day, Keanu and Sandra stood near the entrance as young filmmakers walked through the gates. A plaque had been placed near the crooked lamppost. It read, "Dedicated to all unfinished stories that taught us how to wait." Lucas gave a short speech. "This place stands because people chose kindness over noise," he said. "Because two friends came back to finish something not for fame, but for peace." Keanu listened quietly, hands in his pockets, eyes warm. Sandra leaned close and said softly, "He sounds just like him." "He is like him," Keanu replied. "That's how stories live. They echo in new voices." After the ceremony, Maria invited them to walk down the street one last time before it filled with visitors. They stopped by the spot where the rain scene had been shot. The sky above was clear, but a breeze carried the faint smell of wet earth, as if the rain was still hiding nearby. Sandra smiled. "Do you ever miss it? The chaos of sets, the waiting, the retakes?" Keanu thought for a moment. "I miss what it meant," he said. "The patience, the people, the small truths you only find when you slow down." She nodded. "Then maybe we never left it." They stood for a while, letting silence finish what words could not. That evening, after everyone had gone, Keanu returned alone. He sat on the bench under the old lamp, the same place where he had once waited in the rain. He looked at the plaque again, then at the street that seemed to breathe under the soft light. He took out the photo from his pocket, the one with the reflection shaped like a heart. The corners were worn now, but the image remained clear. He placed it on the bench beside him and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how to finish." A light drizzle began, gentle, barely there, and he smiled. It was as if the world wanted to give him one last reminder. He stood slowly, slipped the photo into his coat, and started walking. The rain followed for a few steps, then faded away, leaving only calm air behind him. In the days that followed, Sandra received a package at her door. Inside was a small notebook wrapped in brown paper. A note attached read, "Found near the lot after the opening. It belongs to someone who understands rain." She opened it carefully. Inside were sketches, chairs, puddles, faces half smiling, drawn in Lucas's handwriting. On the last page, he had written a single line. "Some stories start with thunder, others start with silence, but the best ones end in peace." She smiled and closed the notebook. "He's learning well," she said to herself. Weeks later, a quiet evening came with news that warmed every heart connected to the story. Lucas's short film, After the Rain, had been accepted into a major international festival. Instead of a red carpet, he requested a small, open screening under a tent, and he wanted Keanu, Sandra, and Maria to sit in the front row. When the film played that night, the sound of gentle rain filled the air and everyone sat in silence. The audience did not just watch, they felt. Every drop, every pause, every still frame carried something they could not describe, but deeply understood. When the lights came up, no one clapped at first. Then slowly, applause began, soft, genuine, full of warmth. Lucas turned to the three of them, his eyes full of gratitude. "You gave me this," he said. Keanu smiled and shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "The rain did," Sandra laughed softly, "and we just waited long enough to listen." As they left the festival that night, Keanu looked up at the sky. It was clear, full of stars, no clouds in sight, but in his heart, he could still hear the sound of gentle rain falling somewhere far away. A reminder that some stories never end, They just find new ways to keep falling softly. He turned to Sandra, his voice steady and peaceful. The scene's finally done, he said. She looked at him with a calm smile. No, she replied. It's finally alive. They walked together under the starlight, their shadows long and calm on the wet ground. The world felt quiet, but not empty. It felt full of everything that mattered and nothing that didn't. The next morning came quietly, wrapped in a silver mist that covered the hills. Keanu woke before sunrise, his thoughts still lingering on the festival night. The applause had faded, but the feeling it left behind was something deeper. Not pride, but peace. He sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, watching the sky slowly turn from gray to gold. In that calm silence, he thought about how much life had changed since the day he stood alone on the old studio lot waiting in the rain. A soft knock broke his thoughts. When he opened the door, Sandra was there again, her smile warm but her eyes curious. She held a small brown envelope. "This came to my place," she said. "No return address. Just your name." Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was an old photograph. It showed the same empty street from the rain scene, but this time there was someone standing far in the background. A blurred figure near the crooked lamp holding what looked like a script. Written on the back was a short message. "Some things are not finished yet." Sandra frowned softly. "Another mystery?" He smiled a little. "Maybe. Or maybe someone's just reminding us that stories never really end." Still, he could not shake the feeling that the message meant something more. He looked at the blurred figure again. Something about the posture felt familiar, almost too precise. "This doesn't look like a trick," he said quietly. "This feels like someone who knew that set well." Sandra nodded. "Maybe Lucas will know more. He's been studying everything about that shoot." They called Lucas that afternoon and met him at the Arts Academy built over the old lot. Students walked past with cameras and notebooks, excited, hopeful, full of dreams. Lucas greeted them near the entrance, his usual calm energy surrounded by that quiet fire of curiosity he always carried. Keanu handed him the photo. Lucas studied it carefully. "The way this person's holding the script," he said. "It looks like someone from the original crew. Maybe the assistant director or lighting team. But the shadow behind them. That's strange. Look here." He pointed to the reflection on the puddle. "There's a second shape, like someone standing just outside the frame." Sandra leaned in. "Are you saying two people were there?" Lucas nodded. "And one of them didn't want to be seen." They went to the archives room of the academy, where Maria had kept boxes of old film notes and photos. Together, they spread everything on a long wooden table. Most photos were familiar, behind-the-scenes shots, rehearsals, lunch breaks. But in one corner, tucked under a yellowing production sheet, they found a name none of them recognized. Andrew Layton. Second camera. Uncredited. Maria walked in while they were looking. Her face softened when she saw the name. "Andrew," she said quietly. "He was just a young intern back then. He disappeared before the shoot ended. We thought he left for another job." Lucas looked thoughtful. "What if he didn't leave?" Keanu frowned. "What do you mean?" "Maybe he stayed," Lucas said. "Maybe he filmed something no one ever saw." The idea hung in the air like an unfinished chord. Maria remembered something and left the room, returning a few minutes later with a small box. "This came from storage last week," she said. "It was mislabeled. I didn't open it yet because it didn't match any catalog number." She placed the box on the table. Its label read, "Camera 2, Private Takes." Keanu exchanged glances with Sandra. "Open it," she said softly. Inside were several rolls of undeveloped film and a short handwritten note. "For whoever finds this, I kept recording after they called cut. I saw something that shouldn't have been forgotten. The handwriting was neat but rushed. They decided to restore the reels. Lucas called a friend from the film restoration team who could process old footage carefully. They waited in silence as the machine hummed, the smell of chemicals filling the small room. When the screen finally lit up, the room fell still. The footage showed the same rain scene from a different angle, one no one had ever seen before. The camera was shaky, handheld, capturing moments between takes. Keanu and Sandra were visible, laughing, unaware they were being filmed. The director stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. Then the frame shifted. The camera turned away from the set, toward the far corner of the street, toward a man in a dark coat watching from behind the fence. The figure stood perfectly still, rain running down his face, eyes fixed on the scene. Andrew's voice whispered faintly from behind the camera. He said he wrote it for her. He said the story is real. Sandra's heart skipped. What does that mean? Maria pressed her hand to her mouth. The director used to say the rain scene came from something that happened to him. A real memory. A love story he never finished. Keanu's gaze remained fixed on the screen. So the man in the coat, that could be him? The footage flickered again, showing the man walking away, leaving something on the ground, a small, leather-bound notebook. The reel ended abruptly. Lucas stopped the projector. We need to find that notebook, Maria thought for a moment. If it was real, maybe it's still here somewhere. The demolition team didn't clear everything. They returned to the lot the next day, now filled with scaffolding and new equipment from students rebuilding classrooms. In one quiet corner near the crooked lamp, a section of the old ground was still untouched. Maria knelt down and brushed away the dust. Under the soil, half buried, was something small and dark. She lifted it carefully. The same leather notebook. Sandra whispered, "No way." Keanu took it gently, wiping off the dirt. The leather was cracked, but the initials RT were still clear. The director's initials. He opened it slowly. Inside were sketches of the rain scene, dialogue fragments, and scattered notes. But one page stood out. It said, "The story began with truth." She waited in the rain once. "I couldn't go back. I made the film so someone else would finish it for me." Sandra's eyes filled. "He wasn't writing fiction," she said softly. "He was writing his own goodbye." Maria looked at the note, her hands trembling. "He carried that heartbreak for years. And now it's in your hands." Keanu closed the notebook gently. "Then maybe we carry it forward," Lucas nodded. "We could tell his full story. Not the movie, the man behind it." But Keanu hesitated. Some stories belong in silence. Maybe he didn't want the world to see it. Maybe he just wanted someone to understand. They decided to keep the notebook safe, placing it inside the Academy's archive vault. Maria smiled faintly. "This time," she said, "we finished the story by protecting it." Weeks passed. Life settled again. Lucas's film gained quiet recognition, and students from around the world wrote letters saying how it inspired them to slow down, to listen, to finish what they started. The old Rain Street became a kind of symbol, not of fame, but of gentleness. One afternoon, Sandra walked through the lot alone. A group of students were filming a short piece under light rain, and she stopped to watch. One of them looked up and waved shyly. "Miss Bullock! We're shooting a tribute scene." She smiled warmly. "Make sure you feel the rain, not just stand in it," she said. As she turned to leave, she saw Keanu standing nearby, umbrella in hand, watching quietly. "You came back too," she said. "I couldn't stay away," he replied. "It feels like the rain keeps calling." We finished the story by protecting it. Weeks passed. Life settled again. Lucas's film gained quiet recognition, and students from around the world wrote letters saying how it inspired them to slow down, to listen, to finish what they started. The old Rain Street became a kind of symbol, not of fame, but of gentleness. One afternoon, Sandra walked through the lot alone. A group of students were filming a short piece under light rain, and she stopped to watch. One of them looked up and waved shyly. "Miss Bullock, we're shooting a tribute scene." She smiled warmly. "Make sure you feel the rain, not just stand in it," she said. As she turned to leave, she saw Keanu standing nearby, umbrella in hand, watching quietly. "You came back too," she said. "I couldn't stay away," he replied. "It feels like the rain keeps calling." They walked together through the narrow street, remembering everything that had brought them here, the waiting, the reunion, the discoveries. At the end of the lane, Keanu stopped and looked back. "You know," he said, "maybe the rain scene wasn't about endings or love. Maybe it was about finding peace after the storm." Sandra nodded softly, and learning to let others carry the story next. The rain eased, and a single ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, landing exactly on the crooked lamp. Maria and Lucas arrived just then, watching from a distance. The light shimmered on the wet ground, forming another faint reflection, this time shaped like two hands touching. Maria whispered, "The story's saying thank you." Keanu looked toward her and smiled. "Then let's listen." They stood there for a long moment, rain and sunlight meeting in quiet balance. There were no cameras, no applause, only peace, the kind they had all waited for years to find. That night, as the rain fell again outside his home, Keanu opened the old notebook one last time before locking it away. On the final page, written faintly in pencil, were new words, words none of them had seen before. When they find this, they'll know the truth. The rain never ended. It just changed hands. He smiled, closed the book, and whispered, "And we carried it well." The next season arrived softly, with cool air drifting through the city. The academy had become a living heartbeat of stories, filled with students who came not to chase fame, but to learn stillness. Keanu visited often, walking through the corridors lined with old photographs. Some showed the rain scene. Others showed Lucas, Maria, and Sandra surrounded by young filmmakers smiling with quiet purpose. He had not planned to teach, but the students began leaving small notes at his door. Notes that read things like, "Teach us about patience and tell us how you wait for truth." He never ignored them. One morning, as golden light filled the hall, he sat on the old wooden bench near the crooked lamp and spoke to a group of students gathered around. He told them not about success or awards, but about moments, the kind that teach you humility. He said the greatest lessons come when you are not acting, when you are just standing still, listening to what the world whispers. The students listened quietly, writing every word. When he finished, one girl raised her hand. She asked, "Sir, do you ever wish you could change anything from your past?" Keanu smiled gently. "No," he said, "because even the rain that hurt me once helped me see clearly later." They nodded, and one by one they thanked him before leaving. Sandra appeared near the gate, watching from a distance. She had been working on a new script, something inspired by their journey. A story not about Hollywood, but about human kindness. She joined him on the bench. "You speak like a teacher now," she teased softly. He laughed. "I just speak what the rain taught me." She handed him a small folder. Inside were pages from her new film. The title on top read "The Last Frame of Rain." He looked at her questioningly. "It's not our story," she said, "but it's built from its heart. I want you to read it." He turned the pages slowly. The script followed two strangers who met in a storm, helped each other heal, and learned to say goodbye with grace. It was simple, honest, and deeply human. As he finished reading, his eyes glistened. "This isn't just beautiful," he said softly. "It's needed." Sandra looked away, smiling shyly. "I wasn't sure I should make it. But Lucas said something that stayed with me. He said, 'You don't honor a story by repeating it. You honor it by continuing it.'" Keanu closed the folder and nodded. "Then let's help you make it right." They began planning quietly. Lucas agreed to direct, with Maria overseeing production to keep the spirit true. The project was small but filled with purpose. They used old cameras, natural light, and minimal crew, just enough to keep it real. Filming began in a remote town surrounded by mountains and rivers. Every day started with silence. Every scene carried calm intention. On the first day of shooting, rain came unexpectedly. Lucas looked at the sky with wonder. "It's like the story wants to guide us again," he said. Sandra smiled, then let it. As cameras rolled, Keanu watched from behind. No longer the actor in front of the lens, but a quiet mentor behind it. He gave small advice when asked, always gentle, always patient. During one break, Sandra walked over and said, "You know, you could play the man at the end, the one who leaves the umbrella behind." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "You are the only one who can make that goodbye feel true." He agreed, and the last scene became his. It was simple. His character walks away as the rain fades, leaving his umbrella for someone else to find. No dialogue, no music, just footsteps and water. When Lucas called cut, everyone stayed silent for a long moment. Even the rain seemed to pause, honoring the stillness. Lucas finally spoke. "We have it." That's the soul of the story. Weeks passed as they edited the film together. Each night they watched the footage, not to perfect it, but to feel it. The result was something rare, a film that spoke in whispers instead of shouts. They planned to premiere it at the same community hall where everything had once begun. The invitation card carried a single line: "For those who still believe in quiet rain." The night of the premiere came with soft drizzle, as if the sky remembered. The hall filled quickly, not with celebrities, but with families, students, and quiet dreamers. Maria stood at the entrance, greeting everyone with her calm smile. Lucas adjusted the projector, his hands trembling slightly from excitement. Sandra stood beside Keanu, both dressed simply, no flash, no spotlight. The lights dimmed, and the screen glowed. The film began with a raindrop hitting the ground, then another and another, a rhythm that felt like memory returning. Every frame carried emotion without forcing it. The audience watched in complete silence. Halfway through, a child in the front row leaned on her mother's shoulder and whispered, "It feels like peace." By the end, as Keanu's character left the umbrella behind, a few in the crowd wiped their eyes. No one clapped at first. Then slowly, soft applause filled the hall, not loud, but full of warmth. When the lights came on, Maria looked at the audience and said, "This was made not to impress, but to remind." A man stood up and said, "It reminded me to slow down." Another whispered, "It reminded me to forgive." Sandra turned to Keanu, tears shining in her eyes. "We did it again," she said. He smiled softly. "We didn't do it again. We just finished what kindness started." After the screening, they stayed back to clean the hall themselves. Lucas swept the floor while humming softly. Sandra folded chairs. Keanu carried leftover teacups to the kitchen sink. Maria switched off the lights one by one. It felt right to end the night this way, without glamour, without noise. Before leaving, Keanu looked at the empty screen and whispered, "Thank you, old friend." The next morning, news spread online. Critics called it the most human film of the year. Others called it a meditation on peace. But Keanu didn't read the reviews. He spent the morning walking through the Academy garden, watching raindrops gather on flower petals. He met Lucas there, who had brought a new letter. "The studio that shut down our old film," Lucas said. "They saw our new one. They want to donate funds to restore their archives and honor the people who worked on it." Keanu smiled. "That's what healing looks like." Lucas nodded. And they asked something else. "They want to name the restored archive after the director." Keanu's eyes softened. He'd like that. They went together that evening to see the restored building. On the entrance, a plaque gleamed under soft rain. The Robert Thomas Archive, dedicated to the stories that taught the world how to wait. Sandra arrived soon after, carrying the old leather notebook they had once found. She placed it on a small shelf beside the plaque. "This is where it belongs," she said. "Not in a box, but where stories begin again." The rain started falling harder, but none of them moved. Maria lifted her face to the sky, smiling. "Every drop feels like a blessing," she said. Keanu whispered, "And maybe it is." Later that night, they sat in the old cafe near the Academy. The windows fogged with warmth, and the rain played softly outside. Students came in and greeted them politely, calling them the Rain family. They laughed quietly at the name, but accepted it with pride. Lucas raised his cup. "To the rain that started it all," he said. Sandra clinked her cup against his. "And to the silence that finished it." Keanu lifted his eyes. "And to everyone who waited long enough to understand both," Maria added with a gentle smile. "And to the stories that taught us patience." They all laughed softly, the sound mixing with rain tapping the glass. It was not the laughter of celebration. "This is where it belongs," she said. "Not in a box, but where stories begin again." The rain started falling harder, but none of them moved. Maria lifted her face to the sky, smiling. "Every drop feels like a blessing," she said. Keanu whispered, "And maybe it is." Later that night, they sat in the old cafe near the Academy. The windows fogged with warmth, and the rain played softly outside. Students came in and greeted them politely, calling them the Rain family. They laughed quietly at the name, but accepted it with pride. Lucas raised his cup. "To the rain that started it all," he said. Sandra clinked her cup against his. "And to the silence that finished it." Keanu lifted his eyes. "And to everyone who waited long enough to understand both," Maria added with a gentle smile. "And to the stories that taught us patience." They all laughed softly, the sound mixing with rain tapping the glass. It was not the laughter of celebration, it was the laughter of peace. Before leaving, Keanu looked outside once more. Across the street, a young couple stood under one umbrella sharing a quiet smile. Something about the way they looked at each other reminded him of the rain scene long ago. He smiled to himself and said under his breath, "It continues." As they walked out into the drizzle, Sandra turned to him. "Where do we go next?" he smiled. "Wherever the next unfinished story waits." The rain glowed under the streetlights, turning the world gold and silver at once. Footsteps echoed softly as they walked away, the same rhythm that had once begun everything. Steady, calm, full of life. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving behind a quiet mist that wrapped the city like a dream refusing to fade. The streets shimmered in soft gray light, and Keanu walked slowly through them, his hands in his coat pockets, his thoughts calm and deep. The past few months had changed everything. The old rain scene that once haunted him was now a symbol of peace, and every drop of rain felt like a gentle reminder that some endings are just new beginnings wearing softer clothes. He reached the academy gates just as students were beginning their morning sessions. Laughter and the clatter of tripods filled the courtyard. Maria stood near the entrance holding a warm cup of tea. Her hair glowed silver in the morning light. "You're early," she said, smiling. "The rain woke me," Keanu replied softly. "It always does," she nodded knowingly. "The sky remembers those who listen." They walked together through the hallways lined with new photographs. Scenes from the last frame of rain, portraits of students learning, moments of joy frozen mid-laughter. The academy had become more than a school. It was a sanctuary for souls that believed in quiet art. Every corner carried whispers of patience and kindness. Every frame spoke of humility. In the main hall, Lucas was preparing for a small ceremony. He was older now, wiser, but still carried that youthful spark that came from gratitude. He had decided to open a new section of the academy, the Hall of Unfinished Stories. It was a place where scripts left behind by forgotten dreamers would be restored, studied, and completed by new artists. Sandra arrived soon after, carrying a small plant in a clay pot. "For the new hall," she said. "Something alive so it always grows." Lucas smiled. "Perfect. Just like the stories." Keanu watched them quietly. He realized how time had gently turned their small circle of pain into a circle of hope. The rain had once brought them together out of longing, but now it kept them together out of love. Not romantic love, but something purer, the kind built from shared silence and mutual respect. Later that day, Lucas called everyone to gather in the new hall. The walls were simple, painted soft white with a single large window letting in natural light. At the center stood a glass case. Inside it, the old leather notebook of Robert Thomas, the man whose unfinished film had started everything. Lucas spoke to the crowd of students and guests. "This notebook began as one man's sorrow," he said, "but it became the reason hundreds of us learned how to turn sorrow into beauty. This hall will always be open to anyone who feels lost, anyone who thinks their story no longer matters. Because every unfinished story is just waiting for the right listener." The crowd applauded softly. Maria's eyes glistened with pride. Sandra placed the small plant beside the notebook. The leaves caught the sunlight, trembling slightly, alive and bright. Keanu stepped forward then. He rarely spoke at events, but today felt different. His voice was calm and deep like distant thunder. "Sometimes," he began, "we spend our lives trying to finish something. A film, a dream, a chapter. But what I've learned is this. Finishing doesn't mean closing. It means passing the story forward so it can breathe through others. This hall isn't just about film. It's about faith. Faith in the quiet hands that will pick up where we left off." The room fell silent. Every face reflected the same emotion: respect. Lucas smiled. That's exactly why we built this, Keanu. To make sure the rain never stops falling where it's needed. After the ceremony, the four of them, Keanu, Sandra, Maria, and Lucas, sat outside on the academy steps, watching the sunset melt into soft orange clouds. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing like music. Sandra sighed contently. It feels complete now, she said. It does, Maria agreed. But still alive. Lucas looked thoughtful. You know, he said, I once believed stories had to end perfectly. Now I think perfection lives in continuation. Keanu nodded. That's what he wanted, he said softly, glancing at the horizon. The director. He wanted the rain to continue long after we stopped filming. A gentle breeze brushed past them. Somewhere distant, thunder murmured faintly. It wasn't a storm, just a whisper from the sky. Sandra smiled at the sound. Even the clouds remember. That night, when everyone had gone home, Keanu stayed behind. He walked through the academy halls alone, hearing faint echoes of voices, footsteps, and laughter. He entered the hall of unfinished stories. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the leather notebook inside the glass case. He stood before it for a long time, feeling its quiet energy. Then, from his coat pocket, he pulled a folded piece of paper, a handwritten note. It was his. He had written it the night after the last frame of Rain premiered, but never showed it to anyone. He placed it beside the notebook and whispered, "This belongs here too." The note read, "Sometimes the rain isn't what falls from the sky. Sometimes it's what falls from the heart, and that's the kind that waters everything that grows after." He smiled and turned to leave. Before stepping out, he looked once more at the notebook, the plant, and the moonlight that wrapped them both. It felt like the past and the present were finally holding hands. The years passed gently. Lucas's short films reached students around the world. Maria became a mentor to hundreds of young storytellers. Sandra's script, The Last Frame of Rain, became part of film school curriculums as a symbol of patience and compassion. And Keanu, he continued to act, but he did it quietly, choosing roles that spoke of humanity and hope rather than fame. Every year, on the same day the rain scene was first filmed decades ago, they met again at the academy. Sometimes it rained, sometimes it didn't. But every time, the feeling was the same: calm, real, sacred. One year, when the rain returned softly, Keanu brought a small wooden box. Inside, it was the old umbrella he had used during that first unfinished scene. He placed it in the hall beside the notebook and the plant. "For whoever carries the next story," he said. "May it shelter them like it once sheltered us." Lucas looked at the umbrella, his voice thick with emotion. "It's strange," he said, "how something as small as a drop of rain can carry so many lives." Sandra smiled. "Maybe that's the secret. It's not small at all. It's everything." They all stood silently as the rain began again, tapping the glass roof in a soft rhythm that sounded like applause from heaven. That night, as the storm gently faded, Keanu walked home alone. The streets were empty, shining under streetlights. He stopped for a moment, looked up at the sky, and whispered a quiet thank you. To the rain, to the stories, to the people who stayed when it was hard to keep believing. He reached his home and sat by the window again, the same way he had years ago when it all began. The photo of the puddle reflection still sat on his table, edges faded but image clear. Two hearts of water still joined. Beside it lay a new letter, written by Lucas, left for him at the academy earlier that day. It said, "You once waited in the rain for a scene they never finished. Now you've finished it for all of us." Keanu smiled, his eyes warm and gentle. Outside, the rain started once more, not heavy, not sad, but soft, forgiving, endless. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened. The sound of it was like music, like peace returning home, and for the first time in his long, wandering journey, Keanu Reeves knew the truth, that the story was never really about the rain at all. It was about everything that grows because of it.